How would someone design a prison for maximum suffering? Not just physical suffering, but as much psychological damage as possible too. What if I told you there was a secret prison just like this, but even more bizarre, that there are people who voluntarily choose to imprison and subject themselves to this nightmare? As crazy as it sounds, today's story is exactly that. I will walk you through what it would feel like to be trapped in this nightmare and the medical ramifications of what would happen. While this specific prison doesn't exist anymore for reasons you'll soon learn, multiple prisons just like this are built all around the world today. Spoiler alert, this story isn't what it appears to be. If you can figure it out before I reveal what is going on at the end of the video, comment below, and if not, then just sit back and enjoy the ride. And as always, if you like hearing about the many ways our fragile bodies fail, then please subscribe and hit the notification bell. I'm a board-certified doctor, and I hope to bring you interesting medical cases to make you squirm, jump, laugh, and cry. Prisoner 1 groggily wakes up with a severe headache and a large, painful bump on his forehead. Feeling a liquid drip down into his mouth, he realizes he is bleeding. Putting the clues together, he concludes he was knocked unconscious but does not remember how he got here. He has no memory of who he is or what is going on. It is your job as the viewer to help him figure it out and escape, before he dies a tragic and lonely death. You see, Prisoner 1 is suffering from retrograde amnesia secondary to traumatic brain injury. Something happened in this mysterious place, and now he has no ability to recall the events that directly led up to this moment. Prisoner 1 pushes himself off the wet, soggy ground, but he doesn't get far. His head immediately hits the metal ceiling, forcing him back down to an awkward sitting position. How many more brain cells can he afford to lose? In the same instant, a wave of nausea hits him as he smells the putrid odor of urine, vomit, and feces all around him. He isn't able to locate the source as he is in complete and utter darkness. He doesn't mind the darkness as much, but what really unsettles him is the deafening silence. In the darkness, there's nothing to distract him from his imagination. With no sense of time or frame of reference, the seconds feel like minutes, and the minutes feel like hours. It isn't very long before his brain begins to conjure up noises and shapes in the silent darkness. Did something just move in the corner? Is that laughter I hear? Starved of any stimuli, Prisoner 1 begins to see shadowy figures and hands reaching towards him from the distance. Panicking, he begins to crawl, but in doing so, he stumbles over several large, irregularly shaped masses. Using the only sense he has left, he desperately gropes at these lumps. A mixture of mucus, slime, and some sort of soft, elastic material molded on a rigid base. He systematically moves up the mass until the grim realization hits him. He cannot ignore what his hands are telling him. There it was, the undeniable contours of a jaw leading to a mouth sitting below a nose, just a few inches away from a tangled mass of hair. He was undoubtedly molesting a corpse's head. Realizing this, he pulls away and frantically crawls in the other direction, only to again slam into another metal wall almost immediately. He runs his hands along this surface now. The wall quickly curves to become the metal ceiling that his head had just slammed into earlier. Prisoner 1 had never felt truly claustrophobic until now. This is the most intense and overwhelming sensation he has ever felt in his entire life. Like a rabid animal trapped in a cage, his primitive instincts take over in a desperate attempt to create space. He tries to stand and pushes against the ceiling with all his might. Pinning his neck in an awkward angle against the ceiling, he strains with all the muscle fibers in his being, but the utter uselessness of his efforts worsen the panic. He rapidly devolves into hysteria, now clawing, punching, and flailing his hands in circles all around him. The poor man loses all sense of position and balance in this frenzy as the darkness crystallizes and manifests into palpable form, crushing his chest and making each breath now an agonizing ordeal. In this vortex, his consciousness quickly coalesces around one simple final request. And for that request, blinded by selfish self-preservation, he was prepared to do anything. Sell his mother, offer his wife, sacrifice his son. In this state of despair, he was no longer a man. He was a beast, a machine, an entity whose entire existence, entire purpose was seemingly summed up by this one singular need for space. Prisoner 1 was in the midst of a severe panic attack induced by solitary confinement and sensory deprivation, forms of psychological torture known to drive people to suicide or madness. When the brain is deprived of stimuli, it begins to fill in the blanks with hallucinations to occupy itself. Victims often develop extreme paranoia and difficulties with memory and concentration. Prolonged exposure results in further psychological deterioration to the point of irreversible damage. Of course, if you are a prison designed for maximum suffering, you want your inmates docile, fearful, and incapacitated. In this state of mind, who would be able to logically figure out a way to escape? The one unfortunate thing Prisoner 1 did not hallucinate was in fact the dead bodies all around him. By littering the tiny cell with the dead, the prison sends a simple message: forgo all hope. Unfortunately for Prisoner 1, this was only the beginning. The torture has yet to begin. Hello everyone, hope you're liking the story so far. Just wanted to interrupt and bring you a word from one of our sponsors. Just kidding, we don't have any. So please, do me a favor. If you like the story so far, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and hit the notification bell. Okay, now back to the story. Prisoner 1 doesn't know how much time has passed since his last panic attack. Time loses all meaning in this place anyway. He would have been just fine slipping back into a coma, except at this point, he is shivering uncontrollably and urinating on himself every few minutes. Slowly awakening from his slumber, he is only now just acutely aware of the near-freezing temperatures of his environment. Where am I again? With this memory loss compounded by the eerie silent darkness, his mind begins to play tricks on him once again. Rapidly flipping in and out of consciousness, in one moment, he is marooned on an Arctic blizzard in the darkness of the night. Next, he's scaling Mount Everest with nothing but a ragged t-shirt on. Then, he's a crystallized ice cube floating around a giant glass of water. Now he's floating around the deepest, blackest trenches of space, devoid of any light or heat. To finally, the closest thing to reality, being trapped in a meat freezer surrounded by human corpses. He snaps out of it and awakens. The corpses! The corpses! In this brief, lucid moment, he hatches a plan. As morbid as it may be, he knows he will not survive long in the cold without some sort of insulation. Pushing away his disgust, he scours the tiny cell for all the bodies he can find, piles them together in one heap, and does the unthinkable. Nestling himself in between the lifeless limbs, torsos, and heads, his frail body blends right in. His only comfort is that if he dies right here, his corpse will already have friends. This prison uses hypothermia as a second torture method to incapacitate its victims. The cold slows down tissue metabolism and inhibits the electrical signals of the brain and the heart. When the core temperature even drops a few degrees below our usual 98.6 Fahrenheit, we suffer an obvious decline in neurologic function. Even mild hypothermia will cause poor coordination, slurred speech, impaired judgment, and cold diuresis. Have you ever noticed that you urinate more when you are cold? That is cold diuresis. As the body constricts the peripheral blood vessels of the skin and extremities to concentrate the body's heat to its vital organs, it inadvertently builds up more pressure and blood flow to the kidneys. The kidneys, sensing this increased blood flow, ends up filtering larger volumes of blood per second, and thus more urine is created per second. The body's first line of defense against the cold is to shiver, but the involuntary contractions of the muscles generating heat can only do so much before this mechanism is overwhelmed. In fact, when someone stops shivering despite being cold, that is a very dangerous sign. Keep on pushing it, and the confusion will worsen, causing its victims to start paradoxically undressing, pushing the thermostat a few degrees colder still, and the body's organs begin to crawl to a standstill one by one, until the entire enterprise comes to a complete stop, and the body's liquid is forever frozen in place. If the darkness nor the cold doesn't torture Prisoner 1 to death, the prison has one final surefire method of execution. Nestled in the pile of corpses, Prisoner 1 begins to feel sick. Despite fighting off the cold and the panic, he finds himself hyperventilating once again. His skin is flushed and dripping with sweat. A wave of nausea sweeps over him again, amplifying the excruciating headache crushing down from above. He notices the air suddenly feels both thick and thin at the same time. He is gasping now, short of breath in a way he has never felt before. In the darkness, faceless shapes begin to materialize, taunting and flirting with him, compelling him to give chase around the room. But he cannot, for all the concentration and energy he has left is now devoted simply to supplying the muscles around his collarbones and ribs. They strain and groan in an attempt to help the chest expand, augmenting the already tired diaphragm, futilely pulling the thin air into his lungs. Prisoner 1 feels like he is suffocating. He pushes the blanket of corpses away and staggers around drunkenly looking for something he cannot see. His breath is ragged and irregular now. If there was a gasket covering his blood vessels, his severely elevated blood pressure would have blown it off sky high. Feeling his pulse, his heart rate had been cut down to 30 beats per minute, almost half of what is necessary to sustain a human being. In the next split second, His right pupil is blown, and the prisoner collapses to the floor, his limbs writhing and convulsing like the legs of a spider that has just been smashed off the wall. Foam and spittle form in his mouth as he seizes. He is now unconscious and fully paralyzed. Forced onto the ground with his head facing the ceiling, gravity pulls the foamy, aerated saliva into the most dependent portion of his mouth. The foam quickly pours into his trachea and fills his vocal cords, blocking all air entry. It doesn't even matter at this point in time anymore because the base of his brain, the area that reminds the body to breathe, has been completely damaged anyway. Even if his trachea was unobstructed, this man will never know to breathe again. As he chokes and drowns in his own saliva, his heart goes into cardiac arrest from the lack of oxygen, and all is silent in the room once again. This is what it feels like to be suffocated and poisoned at the same time. What do you think is happening right now? How is this man being poisoned? If you have a hunch, pause the video now and comment down below before I reveal the answer. Did you do it yet? Okay, here we go. Without even lifting a finger, the prison saturates its victim's bloodstream with a potent acidic poison. This poison is so deadly that it can cause hallucinations, seizures, strokes, and herniation of the brain, a process where the brain is forced out of the skull due to too much intracranial pressure. Prisoner 1 didn't realize it, but his special cell is designed like that of an airtight metal gas chamber. Allowing neither fresh air to enter nor stale air to exit, this design causes the inmate to poison themselves as they breathe back in exhaled carbon dioxide they themselves produce. Accumulated blood levels of carbon dioxide builds up as an acid in the bloodstream. The medical term for this is respiratory acidosis. When the blood becomes too acidic, it triggers chemoreceptors in the brain to breathe more rapidly. Unfortunately, in a trapped space, this hyperventilation only makes the situation worse as more carbon dioxide is taken right back in. As the acid accumulates, victims will become fatigued, somnolent, and short of breath. They will become nauseated and, if lucky, slip into a coma or die immediately from cardiac arrest. If they are unlucky, they will enter a nightmare-fueled semi-conscious state as the increased carbon dioxide induces swelling of the brain via dilatation of its blood vessels. The brain swelling will increase intracranial pressure and push the brain out of the skull. This is a deadly, virtually irreversible event heralded by a trifecta of signs known as Cushing's triad. 1. Bradycardia, or a very slow heart rate. 2. Severely high blood pressure. And 3. An irregular pattern of breathing. Brain herniation will damage the base of the brain, known as the brain stem, the part of your brain that controls all involuntary bodily functions like breathing, heart rhythms, and swallowing. Like the utility or electrical panel of a house, once you destroy this, nothing inside will work, and in no time at all the body's functions will spiral into a state of disarray, like a headless chicken. Unfortunately for Prisoner 1, he was unable to escape from his dark fate. The prison has become a tomb for all of eternity. His fresh corpse blends right in with the rest of the bodies piled around him. What is going on? Where is this horrid place? Who would build such an abomination? This man would. Stockton Rush, co-founder and CEO of a deep-sea exploration company known as OceanGate. On June 18, 2023, Stockton, along with 4 other victims, was killed aboard OceanGate's submersible, which set off a global rescue mission and an international media sensation. Blamed for making a piss-poor submarine out of substandard materials and accused of skirting industry safety regulations, some say he deserved what he got. Others say he was let off way too easily and should have suffered more for his hubris. If it isn't already apparent, this story isn't about a real prison. It's about Stockton's submersible, which under the right conditions would have turned into the most inhumane prison possible. This story imagines what would have happened if the submersible did not implode from the insane pressures found on the ocean floor. It imagines what a lone survivor would have gone through and how something as quirky as a $1 million submersible controlled by a gaming controller would have become the most horrific prison imaginable. Because think about it, what would the perfect prison look like? You'd want it to be 1. Completely isolated from the rest of humanity. You would also want it to be 2. Physically impossible to escape from. And if you are a psychopath, you would want it to be 3. Inflicting the slowest and most painfully torturous death possible. The OceanGate submersible hits all 3 of these. Only 10 subs in the world can make it to the bottom of the ocean at 12,500 feet deep, and even then, you can't just open the door and invite people over for tea and cookies. Because to leave would be to immediately die, as at that depth, you are subjected to 400 times the normal pressure you're used to. In other words, you'd be facing 6,500 pounds on every square inch of your body. To put that into context, the strength of a grizzly bear's jaw is just under 1000 psi. Thus, 6500 psi is equivalent to exposing each square inch of your body to the strength of 6.5 grizzly bears combined. And as the story illustrates, conditions at the bottom of the ocean are just completely incompatible with human life. The bottom of the ocean is just a few degrees above the freezing point of water. You have no oxygen, and the more you breathe, the more poisonous the air becomes. And the darkness is quite like nothing you've ever seen. Literally. I always thought some patch in outer space would be the darkest place in the universe. But out there, you're surrounded by light from trillions of stars at least. But at the bottom of the ocean, nothing. Light will not reach anywhere beyond 1,000 meters, and at a depth of 12,500 feet, 10 Empire State Buildings below sea level, it's a pitch black darkness you can almost feel. When the Ocean Gate story first broke out, I stayed up several nights horrified at the thought of being suffocated in a freezing submarine in complete darkness, where no one could find me. I imagined myself as a billionaire, contained within those metal walls, horrified at the thought that without a doubt, this tiny space would be my coffin. And even worse, that I had put myself in this situation after ignoring all advice and wisdom to the contrary. That despite all my wealth, knowledge, and with the whole world trying to find me, I would still never again see the light of day or my family ever again. I bet Stockton would have given all his money and more for even just one more day in the sun, even if just for one more breath of fresh air, even if just to feel the wind for one more second. $1 billion for the simplest of things that you and I put almost zero value in. In their final moments, Stockton and the Ocean Gate victims would have spent all their collective wealth to get what you and I already have. These are the beautiful invisible things all around us that we ignore and disrespect at our own peril. So, what's the key takeaway here? Despite all the chaos of the world, despite the fragility of our bodies, despite an out-of-control consumer culture and the cult of wealth chasing, please, for the love of God, just take the next moment to enjoy what you have. Open the window, feel the breeze, smile at the sun, hug your loved ones. And definitely, most definitely, please stop feeling inferior to those in the world who seem to have it all. Because all of that really doesn't matter. In their last moments, staring into the darkness of loneliness, they would have given anything, done anything, to trade places and be in your shoes. For even with all the money and privilege in the world, a metal coffin will suffocate you all the same. Think on that before you go to sleep tonight. And as always, if you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Studies show that hitting the subscribe button makes you 2 times more grateful. Okay, my friends, until next time, stay humble, stay healthy, stay fresh. Peace.